Love reptiles? Don't miss this. If you're passionate about reptiles, amphibians, and everything cold-blooded, Reptiles magazine is a must-have. Each issue is packed with expert care tips, stunning photography, and the latest news in the reptile world. Whether you're a seasoned herpetologist or just starting your reptile journey, this magazine has something for you. Subscribe today and stay informed on the best ways to care for your scaly friends. For only $14.99 a year, you can step outside your algorithm and get exposure to things that you wouldn't normally see or learn about. My family reads Reptiles magazine, and you should too. Visit subscribe.reptilesmagazine.com to get started. This is the Expert and the Idiot podcast. If you like the show and you'd like to support us, there's a link to our Patreon in the description below. Some benefits include getting access to new episodes up to a month in advance. There's also links to USARK and USARK Florida. If you're not already a member, please sign up. Enjoy the show. All right, welcome to episode 64 of The Expert and the Idiot. Today I'm talking to Jeremy Turgeon of Brassman Reptiles. And I'm excited to talk to you because you've had quite an extensive career in the reptile industry. Obviously you've got your own podcast with Rob, which is fantastic. I love listening to you guys. But then also you've worked at Nerd. So how did you get started in reptiles? What started the addiction, and then how has it evolved and changed as time has gone on?
Yeah, so I feel like my story is fairly similar to most. I was a kid infatuated with dinosaurs. Then you see reptiles in the local pet store and you're like, it's as close to a dinosaur as it could possibly be. I remember going to one of the local mom and pop pet shops to get dog food with my mom when I was very young and saw a Chinese firebelly toad. And thought it was the coolest thing in the world. And I threw a temper tantrum in the store and my mom caved and let me get it. And we got the whole setup and everything. And
Nice.
that was the beginning of the chaos. And after a while, of just researching and begging, I was like, I'm just infatuated with these things, and I was lucky. I was born in the early 90s, so we had a computer in the house. Thankfully, I grew up in the internet age a little bit. But I spent time like researching. I would go to the school library and look up books on animals and stuff. And it took me about 6 years of convincing before my folks finally let me bring a snake in the house. I had lizards and not turtles, excuse me. I had lizards and amphibians. But my mom's two big things were like, no snakes, no turtles. And I love turtles, but I loved snakes that much more. So the snake was like the target. And finally, it was like my 11th birthday. And my mom was like, I've been thinking about letting you get a snake. And I lost my mind. Like, it was like, what? Oh my God. Went to a local Petco and got a little snow corn snake that, unfortunately, as we experienced across the board with so many different species, actually was ill when I purchased it. So it did not live for very long, which was definitely a massive hit to my enjoyment. But went back to that same mom and pop shop that I got that firebelly toad at, and they had just gotten in some ball pythons. And back then, pet stores only had normal ball pythons. So I remember just staring. They were like, oh yeah, we got like 8 in or whatever. And they lifted up the hide box in this big, like 40-gallon aquarium. And there were a bunch of normal baby ball pythons, but there was one that had this really bizarre pattern. It was very, very thin, and it was a brighter brown than all the other ones. And I was like, I want that one. And I had that snake for 18 years. Wow. Before she passed away, and she passed away because she actually got egg bound.
Oh
um,
no.
and unfortunately passed away. That was a massive hit to me personally, because I was like, man, I literally came up with this snake, man. Like, this was the
Yeah.
one. Um, but yeah, so that once I had the green light on the snakes, it was just a matter of like making sure my parents knew I could take care of it, and do all the right things. And by the time I moved out of my parents' house, I had like 150 snakes in the house.
Whoa.
Yeah, dude.
Whoa.
It was wild, man. It was wild. So I started my very first business, J&D Reptiles, when I was a freshman in high school, and stood for Jungle and Desert Reptiles. And I had a little bit of everything. I really love colubrids, so I had a bunch of different U.S. native colubrid species. I had ball pythons, tegus, chameleons, berms, blood pythons, Amazon tree boas, a bunch. I had like a quarter of a wall that was just nothing but frogs. It was a wild time to be in my parents' house. My wall of incubators was in my parents' bedroom. I had quarantine racks in the kitchen
What
of
in
the
the
apartment.
hell, dude? Like,
Man,
how did your parents let you do that?
so I think it honestly, my parents are both incredibly supportive. Like, I cannot thank them enough. I was actually just talking with my parents a little bit earlier. Both incredibly supportive, and I really wouldn't have been able to do any of this if it wasn't for them just willing to let me do this crazy thing with snakes. And I had already bred like leopard geckos and bearded dragons, and I had like sold them to some friends and sold stuff to the local pet shops, and I could make a little bit of money, and thought with the snakes I could probably do the same thing. I know that snakes can be a little more challenging to breed, so let's go for it. Um, and then you start finding out about reptile shows where you can see thousands of snakes all in the same
Yeah.
place, and just I lost my mind. And I just love reptiles. I like, you can ask me what my favorite is right now, I'll tell you the Amazon tree boa, but uh overall I just love reptiles. I don't care if it's a corn snake. Like, I love hatching normal corn snakes. I love everything about reptiles. um and because my parents understood that, they were willing to let me kind of go for it. And I gave up my bedroom in our two bedroom apartment. I gave up my bedroom to put all of my animals in there, because in the state of Massachusetts, while you could run a business out of your home, living quarters could not be in the same room.
Oh
So
wow.
I moved my bedroom, my dresser, all that stuff down to the basement of this apartment, which was a legitimate basement. Um, and would either sleep on the futon couch in the living room, or I would sleep there. And I did that for basically my entire childhood, because I wanted to
Wow.
have these snakes. I wanted to have these animals, and I was willing to throw it all on the line to be able to do it. Um, and I got really lucky very early on, when I finally started to meet some people that took me seriously. Um, this guy Adam Harris, who owns a shop in Connecticut called Harris and Wonderland Pets, was the first guy that ever took me seriously when I said I wanted to work with reptiles as a career. He was coming to do a presentation on panther chameleons at the local zoo that I was a volunteer zookeeper at when I was a kid. And
Hmm.
he invited me to his shop in Connecticut. And I told my mom, I was like, "Oh my God, I met this guy. He's got chameleons, and he's got this shop down in Connecticut. He wants me to come by. And can we go? Can we go?" And they were like, my mom was like, "Yeah, sure." It was like maybe 40 minutes away from home. Um, so we made the drive, and it was the first time I got to see like a Nile monitor in person. It was the first time I was seeing like, I don't even know. He had so many cool things, gray banded king snakes. Like, I'd only ever seen pictures of those, and like all this crazy stuff. And Adam and his dad were both just like amazingly intelligent people with everything that they had in the shop. Anything I had a question about, they could answer, they could show me, or had some reference that they could give to me. And then I was introduced to Kevin over at Nerd. So I was probably like maybe 14 years old when I met Kevin.
Oh wow.
And then a couple of years later, I met Brian Barczyk, and those three guys were really the guys that helped bring me up in the industry. I was able to call them for anything at any point in time, and just I was really, really lucky to have that. That network, that inner circle to just be like, hey man, like I'm interested in this, but I don't understand anything about it. Can you
Yeah.
tell me who to go to, or like point me in the direction to get more info? And they always like, yep, here you go. This is who you should talk to, or I've got some here, come check them out, whatever. So I know I'm carrying on. It's
Oh, no.
an involved story, but yeah, then I went up to Nerd. I used to go up to Nerd all the time, and I guarantee you I annoyed the crap out of Kevin for many, many years. It's not hard to do, but one of the times I was up there, he asked me if I was looking for work, and I
How
thought he
old were
was.
you?
So this was back in 2018, I think. So I'm well into my 20s
Okay.
at this point. And I hadn't seen him in a while. I went up to visit, and he was like, are you looking for work? And at the time I was actually teaching music. I've been teaching music for many years. So that's my other life as a working musician. And I was like, I kind of am like, I love teaching music, but also like working with kids literally every day is very tiring. So I worked in a private music school that had an outreach program. So I was in literally elementary through high schools 5 days a week, basically all
Jeez.
year round. So it was taking its toll on me mentally, where I was just like, I think I needed a break,
Yeah, I can't imagine that.
Yeah. So I was like, you know what? I think so. I was like, I think, let me figure some things out. Let me, come at you. We can negotiate whatever I need, whatever you need, whatever. And if we can make it make sense, let me finish out the year with the kids, and then I'll make the move out here. And that's exactly what happened. And I was there for about 3 years before I got some really great musical opportunities here in North Carolina. And that's what forced me to leave Nerd and come down here. And so I've been in North Carolina, got brass band Reptiles rocking and rolling. Been going full time with that since I moved down here. And between that and music, that's pretty much all I'm doing now.
Nice. So what was couple questions.
Yes.
The ball python, was that the first time that she had bred for you, or had she bred for you, numerous times and then got egg bound?
It was the first time that she ever bred. So she was a very weird snake. So if you popped her, she would pop female. If you probed her, it probed male. So I was like, I don't know what she is. I just like, I don't know what it is. And one year, this is actually when I was at Nerd, working at Nerd, she went off food, which was pretty common. And I had never been in the mindset of like, oh, well, let me palpate it, because I'm thinking, well, it probes male. So maybe there's just some muscle tension and I just can't pop a hemipene or something on this snake for whatever reason. So I never thought that it was a female. I thought it was a male. But this one year I was like, you know what? I've never palpated her. Let me palpate her. And sure enough, she had follicles. And I was like, oh, so you are a girl.
Yeah.
And I was like, it would be really cool to breed you. And I paired her up. She literally went by the book, had a few locks, ovulated, everything was going smoothly. And I think she was going on like day 40 post ovulation shed, which I've had ball pythons do before. So I was never stressed. And I came back from work one day and she had just rolled. And I was like, are you kidding me? And I sat in my snake room and just like broke down. Like I was just like, man, like this was my first snake, man. Like this was a bummer, and I just, the one time I decide to, do something different here, it costs me a massive bit. So.
And she was only middle-aged.
Yeah.
Yeah,
she's 18. And I've got friends who've, bred ball pythons that are well into their 20s, with no issues and everything. And I'm like, let's give it a go, I'm like, man, I would have been okay if you just gave me a clutch of slugs, man. Like, I
Yeah,
still
yeah.
would have been okay, and probably just never would have done it ever again after that. But instead, that was just not the course. And there's actually every year when I breed ball pythons, like I reference that moment, because it's actually the only ball python I've also ever lost to being egg bound. So it's,
Really?
yeah, yep. And I've bred probably hundreds of ball pythons, personally, not including what I did at Nerd and everything like that. But I've
Yeah.
never had an egg bound ball python. I don't think I've actually ever had an egg bound snake, except my retic one time. But those are the only two snakes I've ever had that were egg bound out of the hundreds that I've bred.
That is wild.
Yeah.
Do you and what about with the boas? Can they have you ever run into any reproductive issues with them where they don't give birth when they're supposed to?
So with the Amazon tree boas, I actually just had that happen to me this past season. So I'll preface by saying, like, I've bred a handful of different types of boas, never had any issues. Um, and this past season, I had a bit like massive female Amazon, probably one of the biggest I'd ever seen. Bred, ovulated, doing everything by the book. She started to go kind of long in post ovulation shed, and I wasn't necessarily thinking anything was wrong because she was a big snake and was just full of babies. So I'm like,
Mm,
maybe, because there's so many, it's just taking a bit longer. But all the parameters were the same in the enclosure as all the other females that I had bred and, cycled through and everything like that. So I knew I had everything dialed in. Um, and I came home. It was actually right after Hurricane Helene um, had hit us here in North Carolina. I came downstairs into the snake room and she had rolled, and I was like, "What the hell?" Like, I don't
yeah.
understand. Like, there was never. I also never witnessed anything. Like, sometimes you can tell when something's wrong because maybe an egg will move down and then the rest are stuck, or you can see that there's like a buildup of something that shouldn't be there. And
Mm,
there was never any inkling of that. And it was literally the first baby in the line had gotten twisted up in the oviduct.
mm,
So nothing changed because she couldn't push anything anywhere. And as soon as I had, because I really don't like cutting snakes open to even if it's to find out what's wrong. I really don't like doing that. If I'm genuinely curious, I'll take it to a vet to have a necropsy done or something. But um, so I was like, man, I don't understand why there was this issue. So I was like, maybe let me kind of palpate and see what I can feel. And I felt where this first baby was, and I'm like, man, it's kind of challenging to move this baby towards the cloaca. So I manipulated it a little bit and was able to get it down to the cloaca, and the twisted oviduct is what came out first, and then the baby just kind of like folded
mm.
out around it, and I was like, oh my god. So I had snipped that bit of the oviduct to get the snake out, because, mind you, now she's totally deceased, so it doesn't matter anymore. um, every other baby came out with no issues, slid
Mm.
right out, and I was like, oh my god. Like,
Yeah,
you're the reason. You are the
that's too
reason.
bad.
Yeah, that was
And
that was a bummer.
it, and she died from it that quickly?
Yeah, so typically, like, an Amazon is gonna go like 120 to 150 days post ovulation shed. She was going towards like 170,
Oof.
175, and it wasn't unheard of. That was the thing. I had seen other people, because I'm in like a bunch of the Amazon groups and stuff, and I had seen other people who even had some females going like 200 days.
Jesus.
So I was like, and it wasn't like, sometimes when you see Denosha like that, you'll see the females, like, that first third starts to really look dehydrated and shriveled, because like they're putting all of this energy into trying to get all this stuff out. Never
Well,
noticed any of that.
what was that word you used?
Denosha is the fancy word for like egg binding and having things
Okay.
stuck up in there. Um,
Okay.
Never noticed anything like that would give me that inkling of hey, there's an issue. Um, And again,
Damn.
having other reference points of people being like, no, this snake went 200 days, 205 days, 185 days. I'm like, okay, so we're still in that window. It's uncommon, but it's not unheard of. So
Yeah.
I never had any reason to be like, well, maybe we got to find a vet or something. And given, honestly, also given the gravity of the twist, I don't know what a vet would have been able to do. And even if it was a surgical thing, it putting a snake under anesthesia is always a risk.
Yeah.
And it's like, was it going to be worth it? It's up in the, we'll never know. But yeah, that was a very interesting situation for sure.
Yeah, I was just talking to Stephen Cush about some of his animals being egg bound, and man, yeah, it's terrifying. It's like
Yeah,
my biggest fear in regards to breeding is you put all this time and effort into an animal and then you lose them, and then it's like, were you attached to that animal? For
right,
me, in my case, I'm attached to all my animals,
right.
so yeah. So you had mentioned that all of her, parameters were dialed in. So what are your parameters for the tree boas when they're gravid?
So normally I'm going to keep the hot spot, which I've got for everything that's in a rack has back heat, and then the cages have radiant heat panels. But um, on average, they're in the like lower mid 80s for that hot spot. So like 84 to 86 is pretty much where they like to stay. Gravid females, I'll bump those up to about 88 for the hot
Mm-hmm.
spot because they're really looking to hug that heat so that those babies can develop appropriately. So I'll push them to that 88, 89, and you see them glued to the heat. And then
Sure.
humidity wise, I don't really change too much there. Um, so we're sitting between like 50% ish or so. It ranges between 50 to 70%, except during the winter because the basement where everything is at gets really dry. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm down there like every day hitting things really hard with the sprayers because it's brutal
Yeah.
during the winter.
And that 88 degrees, do they have that all night, and do they utilize it all night?
Yeah, so I never do. I've never done any kind of night drops or anything with temperatures. So they have access to that all the time. Um, I admittedly have not stared at them at night when they're gravid. So every time that I've seen them, they're locked in as close to that heat source as possible.
Okay. Yeah, because that's kind of something I'm curious about is if slash when I breed my boas, because right now I just do overhead heat bulbs.
Mhm.
So at night everything turns off. They don't have any heat. But I'm in Florida, so it doesn't get super cold here at night.
Mhm.
Uh, but if I have a gravid female, then I'm thinking I'll need to go to the radiant heat panel route to give them heat overnight, keep it a little bit warmer if they're gravid.
Right. Right. Yeah, I really do like the radiant heat panel um setup. Like I've had that set up with a couple of different gravid females as well, and they'll just sit right under it, like
Mm,
and will not move. And I'm like, hey, you know what you need, so I'm not going to intrude on that. But it's very interesting to see that versus, being pressed up against a wall. Where
mm.
they're really looking for heat coming from a back heat source versus that above heat.
And with your egg laying species,
Mhm.
do you do maternal incubation, or are you incubating everything you get, all the eggs?
I'll incubate everything that I get. Um, Not that I certainly trust nature to keep its course and do what it needs to do. But I also know that in my rooms, humidity levels can fluctuate a lot.
Mm.
Um, just having things down in a basement that's very much concrete, like all the way around, um, is it would make it just that much more challenging for them to do what they need to do and be as effective as possible. So I'd rather just remove that situation and potential unnecessary fatalities.
Sure. Now, going back to your 3 years at Nerd, can you
Mhm.
tell me about that? I mean, because it's definitely a place I want to visit. There's like quite a few places in the country where it's like, God, I don't think I'm ever gonna just be out there for another reason, But there's places that I want to go to
Yeah,
specifically for that reason, So talk to me about Nerd and kind of your experience working there.
man. So it was a wild experience working there. So again, I've known Kevin since I was in my really early teens, and would go up there very, very often. So one of the benefits I had going to work there was I was already very familiar with the majority of the animals that were there. Especially when it comes to ball pythons, the majority of Kevin's genetics, which are still, I think, fairly misunderstood in the hobby as a whole.
Mm.
Um, I was already pretty confident working with them, being able to ID them. I mean, I used to go up a few times a month during hatching season and just like go through and ID ball pythons with Kevin. So going to work there was, I would say, an easier transition than maybe other past employees have had, just because I had all of those years prior going up there, learning from him, experiencing those animals. But so I came in initially when Kevin asked me about wanting work. I thought he was just looking for another employee, another animal care employee. I didn't realize that he was actually looking to fill like a managerial position for the entire facility.
Oh,
So,
wow.
um, so when I realized that that's what he was looking for, the conversation shifted a little bit, because I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm certainly willing to do that. That's just not what I had planted in my mind, because you didn't ask me if I was looking for a manager position. You were asking me if I was just looking for work. So I'm thinking you need
Yeah.
another set of hands to scoop poop, which I'm fine with doing either way. But what I appreciated about that experience was the fact that you have to be a working manager, right? Like, you don't just get to sit in the office and answer emails and answer phone call. Like, there are so many moving parts because there's so many animals, there's so many things going on. You have to be involved in one way or the other. So whether it's communicating with staff about breeding cycles for monitor lizards, or going through with Kevin figuring out what we want to breed for ball pythons, or what Kevin's planning on breeding for retics, and what's going on with the big snakes, and on top of that, watching the market, what the market is doing, going to Kevin and saying like, hey, that snake's not worth as much money anymore.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
want $5,000 for it, the market's saying 2,500. So we need to figure this out. um, there were some business challenges there, because the reptile industry has been around now for decades. It's still, I would argue, in its infancy slash early years. I mean, think ball python genetics. We're still only 30 years in. Like, which is not conceivably a long time.
Yeah.
In the grand scheme of things. So
Compared to dogs, we've had like 10,000 years.
right, exactly. So like, we're still, I mean, hell, when I was at Nerd, we had just found out that clown and cryptic were allelic.
Mm.
Those two genes have been around for a very long time. So we're still finding out new things within just
Can
the
you
last
explain to
5
me what
years.
that means, allelic?
So it basically means when you have two different genes that will create, in this instance, we're talking about recessive genes. So two recessive genes that technically, if you were to breed them together, would give you a normal animal that is double het for both traits. An allelic animal is, in this instance, for recessives, when you breed them together and you get the visual expression of one of those mutations. So with cryptic and clown, you get the krypton, which visually looks like a cryptic, but is technically a double het. So if you breed that krypton to something, your babies are going to either be 100% het for clown or 100% het for cryptic, but they won't be double het, if that makes sense.
Okay. I'm just going to say okay.
Yeah. It's just a really bizarre way of genetics interacting that doesn't fit the normal Mendelian concept for what we understand as genetics in our also very infant understanding of genetics as a
Yeah.
whole as an industry. But like, I remember, so like cryptic was a gene that Kevin had, like first, and he bred it to a bunch of stuff, and he expected it based on the way it looked to be like a codom kind of thing. And when he bred it and didn't really see anything different, he was like, "Oh, it's just another random, fluke thing that popped out." He just wasn't really intrigued by it, so he ended up selling it all to Mark and Kim Bill. And he had a couple, hets that were floating around, and I think maybe one or two cryptics that were just in the facility as a whole. But the vast majority of the project was sold off, and he never really did anything with it. And then I remember seeing, I think it was Billy's video from Mutation Creation about it being allelic to clown. And I was like, there's no way. That's impossible. Like, they don't even look the same. Like, what the heck? So I'm watching the video and I'm like, holy crap. And I couldn't find Kevin. I was like running. The building's like 14,000 square feet. I'm running around the entire building because, like, we're about to go into ball python breeding season. This is an important bit of information to have. And I'm like, where the hell is Kevin? Where the hell is Kevin? So I finally found him. And I was like, you're never going to believe this. And he's like, what? He's in the middle of fixing some fish tank plumbing or whatever down in the pet store. So he's like annoyed that I'm bothering him. And I'm like, you're never going to believe this. Clown is allelic to cryptic. And he's like, what? And I'm like, okay, maybe I'll say it the other way. Cryptic is allelic to clown. Like, does that register better for you? And he's like, there's no way. And I showed him the video and he was like, holy crap. I never would have thought to put that into clown. So he finished doing what he was doing. And then we like run to the ball python room and we're looking for every cryptic and het cryptic or pos het cryptic that we still had in the building to have them all in one spot. And we knew we were going to just plug clown stuff into that. And I think it was that year that we did like the first Inferno Kryptons and Hidden Genoma Kryptons and all that stuff. That's the stuff that made that job really exciting to me. I'm very fortunate to say that I've worked with probably more reptile species because of that job than the vast majority of people will have the opportunity to work with, and understand, and not just like one or two, because Kevin has a very similar problem to me where he likes everything, and he'll get like 20 of them. So, so I get to see, a bunch of Boland's pythons. I get to see a bunch of Amazon basins. I get to see a bunch of Amazon puffing snakes and Ptyas carinata, giant keeled rat snakes, that most people aren't going to see because they're not commonly available. They're, a lot of these things are initially imports, obviously like Boland's and basins aren't, but some of these bizarre South American colubrids and Asian colubrids that are really heavily import based because nobody's really breeding them. Nobody's cracked those codes just yet. The vast majority of people won't get the chance to even see them, let alone be able to touch them. So I'm very, very thankful for that position. It certainly came with its own bouts of chaos. Nerd is not a small ship to sail by any means.
Yeah.
And that posed its own challenges, working with staff, getting staff to understand like cross-contamination and how one mistake can lead to, a massive issue with species, and understanding quarantine protocols and all this stuff. And I'll say the large majority of the staff that we had when I was there was great. But you also get people that come in that also already own reptiles, and they have their ways of doing things with their personal collections. And you have to get them to understand like, hey, when you're here, that switch of how you take care of stuff on your place, that switch gets turned off. We have systems here for a reason, because of how many animals are here, what the potentials are for what we're dealing with. So you need to understand that this is why we do what we do, and this is how it needs to be done. And again, that sometimes creates issues because people go back to their defaults. It's inevitable, it's always how I clean a ball python tub or, whatever. And it's like, that's cool. You got 5 ball pythons, and you don't want any more. It's like, here, there's 500,
Oh
like
my gosh.
we've got a different situation here, but like I think that first full year that I was there, we did like 250 something clutches of ball pythons. It was like it
Jeez.
was nuts.
Now,
Um
how do you feel about that? Like, how is there a need for that many ball pythons?
so this is how I feel with ball pythons. I feel like there's a high level of saturation in the ball python market, 100%. Um, I think the reptile industry is also expanding at a rate that we have never seen before. As it's becoming more mainstream, demand is still steadily increasing for these animals. So I think it's and we have all these different genetic variances and all this stuff that can really attract just about anybody based on color alone of some of these ball
Sure.
pythons. So I think it's important to have that variation. I think in today's world, because there are so many people breeding ball pythons, what I'll say is like at the boutique level, so like the 10 to 20 clutches that are doing the local reptile shows that are satisfying local demand. I don't think it's necessary to have breeders producing 200, 300 plus clutches of ball pythons anymore. Um, if you have an outlet to be wholesaling stuff, like if you have a network of mom and pop shops that, they're your front line that's selling the
Yeah.
pet quality stuff, cool. Maybe that's a different story, because maybe you're saying like, hey, 50 of these 250 clutches are literally for wholesale. Like this is what's going to the pet trade specifically. These other 150 clutches are what I'm breeding for various projects and trying to do X, Y, and Z with. Um, so I think it's a teeter totter moment and it's a nuanced conversation. But overall, I don't think it's necessary to be producing 300 clutches of ball pythons um, in today's world. There's a lot of people doing it, and I also think now in the social media age, we're even more project driven and genetics driven than we have been in the past. And we're also much more open about what genes go into what project. So, not that that's a bad thing, but what it also does on the back end is if you are not working with one of those projects that's now deemed hot and the new trend, your animals now take a back seat to everything that's not that project. And
Hmm.
there's a lot of people. Look at how many subscribers some of these people have, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, in some cases, millions. So there are a lot of people that are looking for those very specific things. And if you aren't producing them, it might take you a while longer to be able to move that animal. So you have to start asking yourself, can you maintain that animal for a longer period of time than maybe that 3-month window that you would normally give yourself?
Mm.
Um, and also, as much as we don't want to throw money into the world of living animals, if you're running a business, you also have to look at your costs. And, if it makes sense to be producing certain things when, economically, financially, it doesn't make any sense. If you've got to spend, $2 a mouse and that snake's now $50, if you're sitting on that thing for 6 months, you've damn near lost money. And that's just in feeders, not even
Yeah.
including electric and time and all these other things that go into it, let alone if you have a staff that you have to pay on top of it to do all that maintenance. So I think the conversation about ball pythons it needs to become a bit more nuanced and understood that they're all cool as hell. Like coming from my time where, you walk into a pet store and all you see are normals to now I can go into a local Petco and there's a banana pied. There's
Yeah.
a lemon blast calico, in the pet store, for crying out loud. you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
like to put into perspective, when I was a kid first going to Nerd, male bananas or coral glows were $65,000 a piece. because
Jesus.
we hadn't figured out it was sex linked. So just getting a male banana was like the rarest thing you could get.
Wow.
Now you can get them for $100.
I know. And that's what's so terrifying, right? Is that that there's got to be people that walk around, they see the prices and maybe they have some cash to throw at the situation and they think I'm going to make a quick buck, but by the time they get those animals and get them up to breeding size, the money's not going to be there anymore. It's already in something else.
Right. And I think that really is the trick, right? Like, I've said this a bunch of times before on other podcasts. I think we've kind of bastardized ball pythons when it comes to how we promote them and how we talk about them. We really drive home the business of it. You can breed ball pythons and be a self-made business owner, and you just have to breed ball pythons. What I'm not going to tell you is every year you need to be willing to invest between $10,000 and $50,000 a year on new genes, new combos to be able to keep your stuff up to par. And what I'm also not going to tell you is this business doesn't scale like your traditional business, right? If I have, let's say I have one FB70 rack, so it's a 30 slot CB70 rack, and let's say I've got 10 males and 20 females, and breed all of them. Let's say I get all 20 females to produce for me, because one rack is not that hard to manage if you're on top of everything watching your females. You can move pretty steadily through it and get decent production. And let's say, okay, I'm going to just keep numbers simple. Let's say I made 10 grand off that one rack. As soon as I add a second rack, because now I'm like, oh, well, if I did 10 grand this year, that means I can do 20 grand if I get a second rack. That's not what that means. That is not what that means. And now you're dividing up your attention even more. So if you had 20 girls that you had 100% lay rate with, because you had that one rack and you had to focus on that one rack alone, now you're doubling the amount of snakes. What's your personal life look like? Are you working a 9 to 5? Are you doing X, Y, and Z? Do you have kids? Do you have, all these other things that can take your attention away, where 30 snakes was no big deal. I can do that in, an hour and a half and I'm good. Now I need 3 hours to take care of stuff. So now my attention's getting split that much more. I don't have 3 hours. Like, man, that's oof. Like, I got to take my kid to softball, or I've got to go do this, or I've got this other family obligation and I really need to be taking care of these animals. Now you start dividing that up. So now let's say you've got 40 females and 20 males, but you still only get 20 females to go. Cool. You might have just made that 10 grand again, which is cool.
Yeah.
But what about these other 20 girls that you've been feeding, putting your time and money and resources and all that stuff into, that have now yielded you nothing because your attention is all divided?
Yeah.
So it gets, I think we've kind of lost a little bit of the, I want to keep it because I just really like it. I think we've lost a bit of that, especially when it comes to ball pythons, because they have been such a big ticket item for so many years. They are the king of reptiles, of reptiles as pets. They fit that. They are the perfect vehicle for it, which is great. It's awesome. But why can't we just talk about, like, hey, like, I made this really cool snake. I think it's wonderful. Like,
yeah,
if I decide to sell it, that's my business. But like, look at this snake. It's cool, man. Like,
yeah. And it has a good disposition and it's been adequately socialized and things like that. And that's the thing too, where you say, like, are you actually enjoying the animal for being a ball python when you have 60 snakes that are inside a tub? Like, when are you actually looking at that animal and appreciating it? Or are you just appreciating the monetary value that it may bring you based off of a potential clutch or neonate?
Right. And, I think the other element of that is, like, I said this recently too, ball pythons, probably one of the only species where we've increased the minimum weight requirements to breed an animal, but we've decreased the age requirement of a female. So like when I was growing up, it was like 3 years for a female, 2.5 to 3 years for a female, and 1,200 grams is what your minimum was supposed to be. Now it's like 18 months and 15 to 1,800 grams. What? Like, how does that one make sense? And, I mean, like, we see people that, especially now as we see the market trends moving so fast and value of projects declining so fast, partly because of oversaturation, partly just because we're trying to, I need room to be able to work on the next project. So cool, I did this. Next. Cool, I did this. Next. We're in that mindset. So now we're like, I need to produce this so it can breed, and then it's out the door. And that to me is where we're losing the value in the snake for what it is the living creature, and again, as a business owner, I'm looking at cost for sure. But for me, it's also one of the reasons why I keep such a diverse collection. I don't want to have to be worried about, well, I need to produce this ball python before it's less than $5,000 a piece. Otherwise, it's moot. It's not worth me doing.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to have to worry about that. I do have a bottom line that I need to cover. I have a feeder bill. I have an electric bill. I have things that I need to do. Like this and music is all I do to pay my bills. So, I got to make sure I'm making sales. So how can I handle that? Some stuff I produce to wholesale, because I have some mom and pop pet shop connections, that would rather buy from a small breeder than go to some of the big chain wholesalers.
They're getting higher quality animals then too.
100%.
So that's a good thing. I mean, there's so many levels to that. Mom and pop shops are like disappearing at an alarming rate. It's super sad,
Yes.
Those should be more prevalent. They should be around more. It's and maybe I'm just saying that because it was a part of my childhood. So for me, it's back in my day,
right.
It was,
yes.
You'd go to the pet store and look around, and your mouth would be open the whole time, and you'd just be in amazement of everything that you were looking at.
Right.
And it's sad that it's harder to do that now. And then you go to Petco or PetSmart and you see one depressed, emaciated ball python and a partially dead leopard gecko. And that's what you have. Whereas at the mom and pop shops, you're getting a higher level of care. It's employment for teens that, have an interest in the animals, things like that. I think that there's so many beneficial things about that. And then if they're stocking animals from breeders that care and are putting out high quality animals, that's so much better. That's
absolutely.
like
everybody has a better
level.
Experience.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm so conflicted on the whole ball python thing, because I also know that the entire reptile industry is kind of built on the back of ball pythons, and ball python sales and chasing the morphs and all that. And then at the same time, it's like, God, is there a need for 40,000 listings just on Morph Market alone?
Right.
And then like I hear that, I hear you mentioned the Boland's pythons, right, at Nerd. And it's like, now there's something important. That's something that needs to be bred in captivity. That needs more attention given to it. The tree boas, having Randy Pegues on, he said that all of his are sold. They don't even go to Morph Market.
Yeah.
They're just like, so that to me is an incredible thing, right? Because it says multiple things. A, there's no impulse buy. B, there's people waiting for those animals. C,
yes.
So there's a need for those animals at a high level of quality to just go out, like they're not even sitting around. Those ads aren't collecting dust, and he knows who those animals are going to.
Right.
So yeah, it's that. So do you try are you trying, do you, when, when you're running this business and you're looking at it from that perspective, are you
Mhm.
trying to find the things that people are more interested in and they're well researched and they have like a real passion and drive for that species? Whereas it seems like the ball pythons is less of a drive for the species itself and more of a drive for the rarity of a certain genetic that's coming from the animal and the monetary value that it carries.
Yeah, so I think for me, I want to have a client that enjoys the animal more so than anything else. Um, Not saying that I won't sell to somebody that's, really wanting to breed to produce something and, like that's their dream, that's their goal. They really want to see that come to fruition. Cool. If I've got what you're looking for, let's make it happen. Um,
Sure.
but I want to make sure that the person that's purchasing from me is as educated as possible, whether that information's coming from me or I'm pointing them in the direction of, appropriate sources, or they're coming to me already well read on whatever it is they're looking for. And I think that's another element for me keeping such a diverse collection. Like the Amazons, similarly to Randy, I don't ever really have to post any for sale. People are just
That's
like, "Hey,
incredible.
let me know when you have litter from this animal," and I keep a little list of people, that are interested in stuff from that animal, and when I have them, and they're ready to go, if I have any and I didn't hold them all back, um, then here you go. I have a couple long-term captive animals that I'll be posting on Morph Market just because I haven't promoted having any for sale because I've just been raising stuff up. But the vast majority of stuff I haven't had to post online. Um, and most of the time, those people are already well read on the species, or they've got at least a solid enough gist where it's like, yeah, you're right on the mark for this, and this, and if you tweak this a little bit, you'll be golden. You'll be off to the races. Um, but then simultaneously, like it's also why I breed corn snakes and other like U.S. native colubrids for the entry level keeper that might not know anything, but they're just like, I just want a cool looking snake that isn't going to cost me $5,000 or
Mhm.
more. I want a snow corn snake. That's $50, or $40 or whatever it is. And because at the end of the day, that connection that I can make with that person where I'm telling them like, okay, cool. Well, you want to buy the snake for me? That's great. Do you have a setup? No. Okay. If we're at a reptile show, hey, go check out so and so. They've got everything that you need, and in doing that, if you're smart with how you formulate relationships with other vendors and other businesses, you can, especially if you work the show circuit a lot with the same folks, you can go and say to, you know, I don't know, I'll just make up a random business name, Jungle Cages Inc., and I vend every show with them, and they always have great enclosures. They've got great husbandry supplies, all that stuff. So if you come to me and you say, I want to buy this snake, but I don't have anything that I need for you yet, cool. We'll go to Jungle Cages Inc., tell Johnny that you came from me. I'm going to give you this voucher. You can get 5% off your whole setup if you buy everything from him and you come get this snake from me. Like start building a relationship with other businesses so that you're going to elevate yourself and maybe work the same thing with Johnny from Jungle Cages. If they buy a setup, send them my way, they can get $20 off a snake, because they
Yeah.
bought their whole setup from you. Like build those relationships, you know um but also like we the breeder have a responsibility to educate whoever's buying whatever from us, more so than just, oh yeah, put it in a cage, put it at 85 degrees and 60% humidity and it'll be fine. You give it a frozen mouse every once in a while. Like, cool, thanks for the 1965 description on how to keep reptiles. Like, that's wonderful. Here's your Home Depot light thing and just have fun. um like, tell me how to take care of that snake. Tell me something about that snake that's going to be interesting. Like, I love US native colubrids, and one of the biggest selling points for me when I'm communicating with people, ball pythons are great. If you want a ball python, that's awesome. Where do you live? let's say, do you live in New England? When the power goes out in the middle of a winter storm, if you don't have something for and we're talking like a generator or something like that can help heat your house or keep your house, running. Most people aren't thinking about that for their one ball python. But guess what? This corn snake that's native range goes as far north as New Jersey is going to withstand these cooler temps if you've lost power for 2 days than your ball python that you're now going to have to put in a snake bag and like put in your hoodie with you so that it stays warm. That corn snake's probably going to have a better chance of survival, even if you just leave it in its cage, because it's native to the US. I'm not saying go release it when you're sick and tired of it, but I'm saying like as an extra layer of comfort as the keeper, here's something you might not have thought about. Because I think anybody from New England has at least experienced one snowstorm where power's gone out and you're like, it's cold in the house right now. And energy companies are saying it might be 24 to 48 hours before we have power back. Like crap. It's bad enough I got to stay warm. What about, slithers over there?
Yeah.
So like things like that for me, that's what it's all about. Like I want that new owner to have as much peace of mind as possible, followed by like, if you have questions, reach out to me.
Yeah.
And I like, that's something that I learned from Barcheck very early on, was like his staff are answering phones and answering questions and emails and stuff from people who bought snakes that weren't even from them. They're just like, you guys are a resource. Like your website pops up first and I look for this. Like, can you help me with this? I don't mind being that guy. Yeah, I'd love for you to buy the snake from me. Sure, I got bills to pay, but at the end of the day, like I've got a reptile that needs some help. I want to make sure I'm doing it right. And I came across you and you look like you're doing it right. Can you give me a hand? Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like I want you to have the best experience with your animal possible. And if I can be a part of that, great. Remember me when you're looking to fill that next tank.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Cause like that is the other thing, is there's always going to be another snake too. So like
Right.
if you stepped in and you filled that void that the other breeder didn't fill, if they were dismissive or, hey, I already sold you the $40 corn snake, get the hell out of here.
Yeah, exactly.
And now you're filling that void. Well, now, maybe they want an Amazon,
Exactly. You never know. And dude, I shouldn't be surprised anymore, but you'd be surprised at the number of people that I've spoken to at reptile shows that are like, I just bought this snake and like, after so-and-so made the deal, like they just walked away and like I couldn't finish asking, questions, or like I had to chase them back down to answer a question. Like, I just want to make sure that I'm doing this right. And I'm just like, man, like I get it, at a trade show, it's busy, there's people everywhere, you're trying to mitigate a bunch of things. And if you're running a large booth by yourself, I get it, it's chaotic. But like this person that just spent money with you, that just bought this living creature from you, is asking for some help. They just want to make sure they've got it right. Just take the extra couple minutes. It's okay, because that's going to go a longer way. And I feel like that's something that oftentimes we forget about, is like planting that seed with somebody is going to be a much longer lasting thing than just be like, yeah, well, that's the guy I got my first snake from. He didn't do shit else for me. Like I bought my snake from there. I had a terrible experience, but I went to so-and-so and they really helped me out, make sure I was doing everything right. So I'm going to go check them out now.
That's huge. That's
massive.
the biggest thing. Yeah,
it's
that's
massive.
huge. If you can be helpful after the sale, like A, they're going to come back to you. B, they're going to talk about you in a positive way, and they're going to recommend you to their friends. If they're, if somebody says, hey, I want X, Y, and Z, well, go talk to this guy because he helped me out when I didn't even buy a snake from him, you know?
Right.
Yeah. It's, that's, I think that's a big problem in the, in the hobby is, and I've dealt with people like that. You get an animal from them and you run into a complication or a difficulty and they're dismissive. They're they kind of put you down, and they do all these things where it's like, this isn't helping me. Like, now I'm going to go talk to other people. And then you go to talk to other people that say, hey, you know what, I've never heard of that before. Let me look into that. I'm going to ask a couple people, and maybe, and then all of a sudden you're like, this is what I should have gotten from the son of a bitch that I gave my money to, instead of it being, you're going to other people and they're being kind and and charitable with their time.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I think that overall, I think that the hobby's moving in that direction.
I think so too. And I'm excited to see where we're going towards. I think there are some nuanced conversations that will inevitably have to happen, especially, we go through the industry long debates about, racks versus cages and how big of a collection is too big of a collection before people start, being concerned about animal welfare and all this stuff. Like, everybody can handle a different amount of, whatever's going on. But understanding that there is a difference between a breeder and a pet keeper, and not saying that we shouldn't hold people to a certain standard, but a breeder shouldn't necessarily have to adhere to the same standards, as a pet keeper, who has 5 animals versus this breeder that maybe, even if it's just, 30 animals or 40 animals, it's a very different situation if you've only got 5 animals, So I think those nuanced conversations are going to need to be had as things kind of progress. But as a whole, I'm very excited to see where things are going. I'm excited to see that people are learning about new species. I mean, hell, we've even seen some of the ball python guys open up and talk about other species that they're working with. In the last 10, 15 years, they've only done ball pythons. Look at somebody like Ozzy that's got boa constrictors as well. I think it's, hell, look at Garrett Hartle at Reach Out Reptiles. Mr. Super Dwarf has got African house snakes just because he thinks they're really cool. Like, I love that, that. And when you highlight stuff like that, you start getting other people's interest, because that person that might be like, no, retic just, I can't do it. Even Super Dwarf, I can't do it. I don't have the space. But whoa, what's that house snake? That's really cool. Like, you never know when you start highlighting that you're going to bring somebody else into the industry inevitably, because guarantee you they didn't know that existed.
Yeah. Did you meet Rob at Nerd?
No. So Rob and I met I think it was probably at a reptile show or at a New England Herp Society meeting or something when we were very young. And, we would see each other at the reptile shows and the Herp Society meetings and stuff like that. But, and then ironically enough, I just told this story to somebody recently. So there was a period in time where Rob and I hadn't seen each other in a while, not because we had any issues or anything. We just never ran into each other. And we were at the White Plains.
Who could have an issue with Rob? I mean, he's one of the sweetest humans alive.
Exactly. So we were at the White Plains Reptile Show in New York, and we ran into each other, and it had been a couple of years. So we're catching up, and he's, hey man, what's going on? How you been? And I was like, man, I'm stressed. Like, life's kind of kicking my butt right now. And he's like, what's going on? And I was like, well, I just got accepted to Berklee College of Music in Boston, but I don't have a place to live, and I'm supposed to move to Boston in 2 weeks. I can't afford the dorms. I can't afford, an apartment in Boston, for crying out loud. I'm a college student,
Yeah.
And he was like, man, you should have reached out to me. Let me talk to my mom. We don't live that far outside of Boston. Let's see. We got a room. Let me make sure it's okay with my mom. Like, let's make something happen. And I lived with Rob when I was in college. Like,
oh, no shit.
Yeah. His mom was like, just no parties, no, whatever. And I'm like, I'm like, I don't think you realize how closely related to your son I am in that regard. Like, I just want to look at snakes, and I also play the trumpet. Like, that's about it, for me.
You're like, ma'am, I want to be a school music teacher.
Yeah, exactly. But, no, it was literally like meant to be in that moment. But yeah, so Rob and I have known each other for very, very long. I fucking love him, man.
Yeah, he is such a sweetheart. He's one of the nicest people.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so you guys didn't work at Nerd together, or
We
did you?
did. We
Oh,
did.
okay.
Yeah. So that was probably one of the other exciting things for me, was to be able to be around Rob more frequently, because after I moved back from college, I just moved back home to Western Mass. So we would again only see each other at the occasional reptile show or whatever, or when I would go up to Nerd to visit. So yeah, so I was stoked to be able to be going up there and getting the chance to work with him, because Rob is also just super reptile nerd, and I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah, he's so into the animals, loves the animals, so much passion, and then a great guy on top of it.
Yeah, 100%.
So, talk to me about the podcast. You kind of gave me a fun fact a little bit ago about Dr. Stephen Tillis, now
Yes,
doctor.
sir. Yeah.
So, I'd love to hear your kind of the story about the podcast and its inception and how long it ran, and then when it got reborn.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so Dr. Tillis. So yeah, Steve and I knew each other through YouTube when we were still in our teens.
Wow.
I come across his videos, and he was posting all this crazy blood pythons and carpet pythons and all the stuff that I wanted but didn't have the money for, when I was that age. He's like, check out this zebra carpet, and I'm like, that's like $5,000. Like, how did you get that? But yeah, so we started communicating and stuff online, and one day I had reached out to him, and I was like, there weren't really podcasts going on at that time. I think it was like the Bush League Breeders Club and Reptile Radio. Like that was the podcast everybody listened to, and you had to use this website called Blog Talk Radio, where you call in, and
Wow.
your little assistant would be, you're now backstage.
That sounded like
Please.
Dobby, the house elf.
Owner has presented Dobby with a sock. But at the time, Stephen was working with Eugene Bissett, who, if you don't know that name, is like one of the modern godfathers of modern herpetoculture.
Yeah.
And I had pretty solid connections with Kevin and Brian, and we were both lucky to be in the spaces we were in where we could just kind of call these guys up whenever we needed. But if you wanted to talk to them, you had to be either lucky enough to call their place of business and get them on the phone, or see them at a reptile show. And that was really it. You were never going to speak to them in any other capacity. And I was like, man, it'd be really cool to, use the network that we kind of have and talk to some of these guys, and, get them to answer some general questions. We don't need to dive deep into anything, but like, let's talk about their stories, and just kind of figure out more about them. And if we dive deep into a species, then great. But it was more so like, let's bring these people that you might know their name, but you don't know about them. Let's bring them to the forefront a little bit and talk with them. And we did that for a couple of years, I think. And then, because I want to say it was like my junior year of high school. I can remember sitting at the kitchen table with my computer and my phone, like, okay, we're ready to go on this podcast. And I remember we got Kevin on, and Steve was like, well, what are we going to ask him? Like, what are we got to make sure we've got questions for him. And I was like, Steve, we need one, maybe two questions. And he's like, what are you talking about? And I was like, we've only got 45 minutes. Like, that's the only time that we're allotted on this website. Kevin talks. I love Kevin to death, but he will talk and just go on a tangent, similarly to what I'm doing right now. And, but I was like, we just need one or two questions. So I think we asked him something about like the spider ball or something. And then it was like 30 minutes of the episode was done just with that. We're like, oh, well, that's cool. How was the last snowstorm, buddy? Like, I don't know what else, you know. But yeah, and then the only reason it stopped was Steve and I both went to college, and we just couldn't maintain it on top of working our collections and doing what we needed to in school. So we just decided to press pause. And I when I started working at Nerd, I was like, I've got a more structured schedule that includes a little bit more free-ish time. Like I'm not teaching from the hours of 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. So maybe I want to investigate this podcast a little bit. And now being at Nerd for a little while, of course, that's opened up a few more doors to connect with a few other people as well. So it'd be cool to just talk to people. So I reached out to Steve about trying to restart it, and he was like, dude, like I'm trying to get my doctorate. Like time is not kind to me right now. And I was like, cool, man, no worries. I was like, but you were the guy that I started this with, so I wanted to come to you. And I was like, I really want to bring this back, so I think I might ask Rob Christian. And he was like, oh yeah, he's like, dude, Rob would be great. Go for it. I'd love to see what you guys end up doing with it. And I went to Rob and I was like, hey man, I think I want to restart my podcast, Reptile Talk. And I'd love to be able to do it with you, man. Like we when we get together, it's laughs, it's talks, it's nerd out about reptiles, it's whatever. And I think that would be great. And I'm like, I don't want to do a deep dive on how somebody cares for a green tree python. It's like that already exists. I want to talk to the people that work with these animals. Let's hear their stories. Inevitably, we're going to talk about something that they work with,
Sure.
So inevitably we'll have some information there, but we focus a lot on the animals, of course, because that's what we love. But Rob and I have both been around enough people where it's like, man, sometimes when you just stop talking and listen to somebody's experience, you're going to catch a little gem that they discuss. And if you're often like, please tell me about your humidity parameters during the months of March through June, you're gonna miss. Like, you're not gonna have that opportunity to hear any of that. And he was like, yeah, man, like let's do it. So we picked a day. We're like, all right, let's record. Then we'll put together an intro. We'll do all this stuff, and it all just came together so well. And that was really like the rebirth of it. Was just like, I would just want to have a good time geeking out about reptiles with other reptile lovers. And, I think we're now, like, we just released episode 154 with Marshall Mendez. And we had some time with our moves, and then, down to the Carolinas, and then, getting jobs and everything like that. We had a more inconsistent schedule for the last year and change. But we're finally getting back into that rhythm of like, okay, we know we can record on these days typically, so let's start reaching out to people and stuff. And I actually need to talk with Rob because I want to have my other half, my partner, Mark, come on the podcast to talk about what his experience has been like, coming from very much like interested in animals, but never thinking about being surrounded by reptiles, to dating somebody that's entire life is reptiles and now traveling to all these shows and touching giant alligators and doing all this stuff. And like, what's that been like for the last 2 years? It's like we talk with all these people who have been doing it for 15, 20 years, and like they're like locked in and they're loving it. And now it's like, well, let's talk with Mark, because he just got thrown into the deep end of the swimming pool and didn't ask for it. So
yeah.
But so that was the whole concept of the podcast, was literally like, let's just talk to the people that we look up to, that we listen to, that we pay attention to, and let's just talk about their experiences. I mean, some of the people we've spoken to, they've forgotten more than we'll ever know.
Yeah.
And some of the gems that you hear people just drop casually along the way, you're like, oh, I never would have I never would have thought about that. I got to write that down. You know, like maybe that's something that's going to help me or whatever. So that's been the whole premise of the podcast.
How many episodes did you do with Steve?
I want to say maybe like 40.
Wow. Where are these? Are they logged anywhere?
You know what? It's been a while since I've actually looked. I'm going to look really quick since I'm on my computer. Blog Talk Radio still exists. I know that for a fact. I'm searching this in real time. It looks very different than what it used to. So they've moved to something called speaker.com. So I don't even know if those episodes still exist anymore.
Oh, wow. So that's interesting. So you weren't like recording and downloading the file or anything like that. It was all in real time. It would go right to the site. And if anybody wanted to listen, they had to go to this site to be able to. And how were you promoting that at the time? Like, were you on like MySpace and?
Yep. Yeah, man. It was that. And then it was just like word of mouth, you know, the occasional,
Wow.
I think Facebook was a thing. So, you know, talk about it on Facebook and,
sure.
But yeah. Yep. Blog Talk Radio
with Dobby the house elf.
With Dobby the house elf. It's amazing. That was perfect. Heaven presented us with a spider ball. Dobby is free and turns to the left.
How many years between the original and then it being revived? How many years were between that with college and everything?
I would probably say, let's see, I left Berkeley in 2014. It's maybe like 3 or 4 years.
Okay.
In between. So it was certainly a lengthy hiatus. But what I will say, this was actually something that certainly was helpful. So in that time when I was also in college, like I was very much going through a bunch of transitions and wasn't very active on the social media scene for Reptiles. I got rid of my old YouTube channel and like all this other stuff. So when I started back at Nerd and we did the first video that I was in where they did just kind of like an introduction of the new manager or whatever, I had a bunch of people that used to watch my old content from my first business come back, and they're like, dude, we thought you just like fell off the face of the earth. Like, what the heck, where have you been? You know, like what's going on? And when I made the announcement about doing the podcast, a lot of those same people were some of the first in line to come listen, because they're like, man, like we remember the podcast with Steven and we wanted to see like what's new, what's changing, who are we talking to now? That felt really cool. I remember, I don't remember the person's name, but I remember reading the comment on the Nerd video where somebody was like, man, I bought my first corn snake from Jeremy, you know, X number of years ago. It's like 12 years ago.
Wow.
Or whatever. And I still have that snake and it's doing great and all that stuff. And like that comment, like, made me smile and just feel so freaking wonderful. Cause I'm like, man, like that's really cool. Like the fact that you've had the snake for that long, you remember who I was, the animal's still doing great. Like you had a good enough experience to stop and write a comment on this video, you know, like that makes me feel wonderful. And I'm so happy that I can say like I have people that I've sold to and done business with, you know, almost probably about 2 decades now, like, which is wild. You know, I mean, like I was breeding and selling snakes when I was in my teens, you know, and I'm in my 30s now. So it's like, man, you know, like this is just really cool.
And how has the hobby in your eyes changed over that expanse of time? Have you seen a more diverse group of people come into the hobby from a professional standpoint? You know, do you know what I'm saying? Like I feel like the people that are into reptiles is a very diverse group, right? So you're going to get every single flavor in there. Yeah. You are going to get the most redneck dude from Florida to the most, you know, like you're going to get to the complete opposite end of that spectrum, keeping reptiles.
Yeah.
Now from the professional standpoint, have you seen it change a lot, or has it always been sort of, like, do you know what I'm saying? Like like the good old boys kind of way that it is with most industries, I mean, like I'm in a blue collar job in a union, and, so it's like being in that since, 2013, I've seen so much change, right? As a generation is retiring and moving on, and younger people are coming in with different mindsets. It's just changing, so have you seen that from a professional standpoint?
100%. It's funny that you made the comparison of, like, the deep South redneck guy to, the total opposite of that. It was one of the things that I loved about being at Nerd was, you saw some of that diversity right there. If you think about myself, especially coming right out of a teaching gig where I had to be very, prim, proper, this is, well spoken through to this, because I'd come home and be like, fucking ball pythons, afterwards, but that, then you've got Rob, who's got kind of like the reptile look. I guess you got the gauges, you got the animal tattoos, you got this, you got that, and then you had Kevin, crazy old guy with a ponytail, who's a death metal guy. It's just like, you kind of had the whole gambit, and I think we've seen it. I think it's always existed, but I think we're seeing it more because of social media. And like, now there's way more reptile shows. So you're going to these spaces, and you're really seeing the entire stretch of the reptile industry as a whole. And I think it's amazing. I definitely think that we're seeing the growth of the newer generations. We've got the new mindsets and the new approaches to things. We have things that are certainly going to be changing as AI starts to become a larger part of what we do and how we navigate the world. So I think that stretch of one spectrum to the other of person is always going to be there. But I think we're really starting to see a change and a push over the years of, like, this went from this very taboo, ooh, you do what now, to like, oh, you got a snake? That's cool, man. And like, like there's a guy with a polo behind a table, that's like, he's this is his job. This is what he does, man. And he's proud of it. I think we're really starting to see that take over, and I love it. I love it. I think even though the industry is picking up in popularity and starting to become more mainstream, it's still very much taboo. Like, you think about any major news article that goes up with anything reptile related, you read the comments of people who are like, I can't believe anybody would keep a snake as a pet, and that's disgusting, and blah blah blah. So we see what the general population of the world thinks about us in that way. But in comparison to 20 years ago, it is far less of a taboo to be like, oh yeah, I got a pet snake. 200 snakes, different story. But to say, like, oh yeah, I've got a little corn snake at home, or I've got a bearded dragon, I've got a leopard gecko, that's nowhere near as taboo. And I love that, for sure.
And what about from your personal standpoint and being gay? Has that been like something? I mean, obviously you were up in New England, right? Mm-hmm. Have you ever felt like that was put against you by anybody? Like, and obviously not naming names, but like,
yeah.
Because you're in your 30s, right? Mm-hmm. So for me, I had friends that couldn't get married in the state of Florida. Right. They had to leave the state to do something, for their relationship. So it's such a different world now than it really was 15 years ago.
Yeah.
So, like, I'm curious how that has affected you from, being in this professionally and just being you as an individual, and just being who you are.
Yeah. I don't think anybody's ever asked me that.
If you don't
I
want to
will.
answer, you don't have to.
No, it's fine. I don't mind it at all. So for me personally, there's never been much of a change. So I didn't come out publicly until I don't know, maybe 10, 12 years ago.
Okay.
But and I didn't know what to expect. I certainly expected to deal with more discouraging situations than I did. So I would say that personally, nothing really changed all that much. And I'm happy about that. Those who know me know that if you're gonna push me to a point where I get angry, then you've pushed me to a very far point. Like
Yeah.
I have a short temper for certain things, but uh, the majority of things, like I joke about everything. I'm very even keeled and easygoing when it comes to things. So it nothing really changed in that regard, and I'm thankful for it. I This is funny. So doing a nerd video, and I was talking about rufous beaked snakes. And every once in a while, like Kevin would make me do this, or well, he wouldn't make me do it, but when I would talk about colubrids, he really wanted me to be this nerdy whatever. So I would talk like this and be
Yeah.
like, this is my rufous beaked snake, and you're so cool. You come from Tanzania, and you're really wonderful. And at and Donnie at the end of the video is like, are you going to prom? Because it's like you sound like the little high school geek. And he was like, are you going to prom? And I was like, oh yeah, I got asked by so many girls, but they don't know that I'm gay. And and we had people in the comments, they're like, you can't make fun of gay people. And I was like, guys, like, this is me.
No, literally.
like literally. So many girls, but but no. So like I'm for me, when it comes to that kind of stuff on a personal level, I'm all about inflection and intention. If I can tell that you're joking and that it's coming from a place of being lighthearted and we're goofing around, I've got no problem. It's when I can tell that like you're saying something to try to be hurtful or discouraging for no reason, just because you have hatred or malice towards a situation or who somebody is, then I'm gonna say something. And and I've got zero problem with publicly ripping somebody a new asshole. I've done it before. So it's not, and I think that's one of the nice things about like being in a position where I pretty much do work for myself largely. If it's going to damage my business, it's because I did it. And also like I'm not just going to go out and do something random and stupid and aggressive for no reason.
Sure. Yeah.
So if I get to that point, those who know me very well know if I'm at that point, I was pushed there for, I'm there for a reason. I'm not just there because somebody was like, I'm going to flick your nose. And then I start losing my mind, and verbally assaulting you, very different situation. But yeah, so overall, I'm very happy to say that like, I didn't really experience, any massive negative things. I'm sure I had some people that unfollowed me or unfriended me when I was more public about my relationships or whatever, and I'm sure I probably do now. And I've had people that have been friends of mine on social media for a while that in the current state of being post some things, and I'm just like, yeah, you know what, I don't care to follow this anymore, and I'll just remove myself. I'll just quietly exit, because I'm just like, everybody's entitled to their opinion, to what they want to say and what they want to do, but when it comes to being in my space and my social media feeds and all that stuff, I get to dictate what I see and what I don't see, and I'm going to use that capacity. So if we're not talking about music or snakes, or I haven't known you for, a large portion of my life, and you start doing some stupid shit or saying some stupid shit, I'm just going to back away. And that's cool. Life keeps on spinning and time keeps on ticking into the future. So,
yeah, well, I mean, how many of us are on social media strictly for reptiles?
yeah.
And then, there's like a ton of political stuff that goes along with that.
Yes.
And I love it when people post and they're like, hey, if we could do less of the politics and more of the reptiles, that would be great.
Yeah.
And I wholeheartedly agree with that.
Mhm.
That's my escape. And honestly, I wouldn't be on Facebook if it wasn't for the reptile community. I wouldn't
Yeah,
even be
yeah.
there.
Yeah, I'd say that a lot to people. Like if I wasn't a business owner, if I wasn't a musician and artist, I wouldn't be involved in the social media stuff. It like here's my phone number. Like
Yeah.
call me or text me or whatever. I don't need to see all the nonsense and drama. But alas, we do have to put up with it. So
But like you said, you can be your own curator and curate what you want to see and who you want to see it from. And that's
absolutely.
the beauty
And
of it.
that also doesn't mean that you're putting on the rose colored glasses, right? Like where
Mhm.
you only see everybody that agrees with you and blah blah blah. Like I've got friends that I disagree with, on various topics, and I still love them and we're still friends and whatever, and that's all well and good. It's when the disagreement starts pushing out vitriol and hatred that comes from in many instances a very ignorant place of understanding or lack thereof, that
Yeah.
I'm just like I don't need that. I don't want to deal with that. It's not because I don't value your opinion or I don't think that your opinion is worth anything, but when it's based in clear ignorance, then I'm just like, okay, like we're good. You exist in that space, but you can do so without me, but
Well, and the funny part is that deals with reptiles and being a reptile keeper so much, right? Because you put something out and when it gets traction and it gets exposure to people outside of the reptile circle, that's when you start getting the comments of it's sizing you up to eat
oh
you. This
yeah,
won't be,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
like I literally made a video of my spotted python attempting to eat my hand, for whatever reason. And
yes,
everybody's
because
like,
it's a
won't be
spotted
so,
python.
yeah. And everybody's like, it won't be so funny when it's 20 feet long. And it's
Yeah,
like, what are you talking about, bro?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Or people saying like, oh, you could solve that problem with a magnum and, all these
Mhm.
stupid, ignorant things. And again, it's like, why are you here? Why did you even stop here to comment?
Yeah. Right.
Just keep going.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And the way I look at that kind of stuff now is just like social media is so algorithmic based and whatever. Like if you want to leave a comment that's not a positive comment, thanks for helping me in the algorithm at that point. Like the algorithm pays attention to the number of comments and interactions. It doesn't pay attention to the context unless it's
Mhm.
unless it's something that's like truly overtly racist or homophobic or whatever, where some bot comes in and is like, whoa, you're in Facebook jail for the next 30 days,
Yeah.
but outside of that, if you're like, this is stupid or whatever, like, cool, thanks for your comment, I appreciate it, you just help boost me in this algorithm
Yeah.
here,
Yeah.
like, you share this and also say that this is stupid. I would appreciate that. That would help me out a bunch. It gets me an extra 5 cents, so I appreciate it. And I think going about it that way is put your mind at ease for a lot of those situations. Because yeah, it's so frustrating. Like seeing people be, oh yeah, you could solve that with a magnum, or you could just take a shovel to that thing, and the
Yeah.
only
Yeah.
good snake is a dead snake, and it's like, yeah, well, that's if that's what you think, cool. You should share this
Yeah.
and also say that, and
Yeah. Yeah.
so please, if 5 cents goes a long way.
Yeah. So we've talked about the Amazons and
Yep.
the ball pythons and the corn snakes. What else do you keep?
Oh man, I've got leopard geckos, crested geckos, gargoyle geckos, chihuahua geckos, uh, black-tailed tree boas, Corallus ruschenbergeri, annulated tree boas, um, Texas rat snakes, Mexican black kings, Cal kings, San Luis Potosi kings, North Mexican pines, Cape gopher snakes, Western hognose snakes, um, carpet python, jungle carpets, and coastal carpets. Um, let's see, I've got a retic. That's just a pet. I'm sure I'm forgetting something. Yeah, a little bit of everything. Yeah, a little bit of everything.
Man, what have you stopped keeping that you wish you still had, or you might want to get back?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, Damn, yeah, that's a really good question. Honestly, so I would love to keep more amphibians.
Mm.
So like I have the geckos largely because my partner, when he started to get invested in the animals, like and really start paying attention to reptiles, he really liked the geckos. Um, Outside of that, I was a snake guy pretty much through and through, just for a matter of time. And I work again as a musician, so I'm often on the road 2 or 3 days at a time. Lizards need that care, amphibians need that care on a much more consistent basis. So snakes were just easier. I could get away for a handful of days and everything would be okay. But I really do miss keeping amphibians. I used to keep a lot of poison dart frogs and tree frogs when I was a kid, and absolutely loved that. I loved building living vivaria and having a little slice of the jungle in the house. Like that was always like the coolest thing. Um, so I miss that, and would love to keep more of that at some point in the future. Maybe if I pick up another teaching gig and decide to travel a little less, that'll be something that pops up. But um, the a snake species that I no longer keep, that I wish I didn't stop keeping or would like to at least get back into them at some point, would be flying snakes. The Chrysopelia. It's like the paradise flying snakes, ornate flying snakes. I kept ornate flying snakes for a while when I lived in Massachusetts. So this was now 7, 8, 9 years ago. And they were the coolest little colubrids. They were so cool. They would always be out perched, and you'd walk by the enclosure and they'd tilt their head on like a bearded dragon. And it's just like, hey, what's going on, dude? Like, what are you doing? um, Getting them to actually fly and glide in the reptile room was wild. Being
Oh,
able
you
to
could
see that
actually
in
get
real
them to
life.
do that?
Yeah. So if you could get them, if you put them in a space where you could at least get them to see a target far away, uh, you could convince them, you just kind of tickle them a little bit and you could convince them to jump and then glide over to where they had to go. Or if
Oh
you're
my
cleaning the
God.
enclosure and you startle them, they're going to dart out, and inevitably I had my enclosures a little higher up, so they would just end up gliding to the other side of the room. Um,
That's
but
insane.
they were super freaking cool, and I never bred them. I did try but didn't have success. um and I would love to keep them again and put them in a larger enclosure. I think I had them in like a 3x2x2, which was decent. They're not a long snake, maybe like 30 inches or something.
Okay.
But I would love the chance to keep them again, put them in a really large, like a 6x3x6 or something, and really just allow them to have that room to move and jump, and
Oh
glide
man, how
from
dope
side to
would that
side.
be?
It'd be insane, man. And a lot of people don't like working with them because they're primarily lizard eaters. And that is a whole other can of worms. This pair of ornate flying snakes I had actually would take frozen thawed fuzzy mice
Mm.
with no issues. And anytime I tell people that, they're like, no freaking way, dude. Like, why would you get rid of those if they're on fuzzies? And I'm like, it was the first time I'd ever kept them. I knew they ate lizards. I had gotten these, they were imports, but they ate frozen thawed fuzzies for me with no problem. So I just figured, like many other species that eat a wide variety of prey, even if reptiles is a primary source, you could get them to take rodents without much issue. So I just thought that was what they did. And like everybody I've spoken to has been like, no, dude, like that's crazy that you had a pair that was willing to take fuzzy mice. And I'm like, well, damn it. If I had freaking known that, I probably would have kept them. But yeah, so I would love to get an enclosure or two of those. And even if it wasn't to breed them, I just think they were really, really cool snakes. I loved watching their behaviors, and having a diurnal snake is also that much more exciting. Like we keep pythons and boas and all the stuff that's nocturnal, that during the day they're in a hide box, they're sleeping, they're not moving, they're not doing anything. So to
Yeah.
go downstairs or to go into your reptile room and you see the snake out chilling and you move and it's like, what? Like, like that was so cool. So yeah, I would try to keep those again if I had the opportunity.
That's awesome. What a great answer. Man, like you could have said something like, I all of pythons, like something that, just some something very common. But yeah, that sounds like such a rare species to have. What about the have you actually kept the Rufus beak snake?
I did. So I kept I think it was a trio of them. I kept those when I was at Nerd. And the only reason I sold them was as I was planning to move down here. It was just a species that I was like, I don't really have a direction for them, and I need to be really smart about what I'm packing up. So that's the only reason I ended up selling those. But they were another really fun diurnal snake.
Mhm.
I would come down, I set them up in a 3x2x2 enclosure and basking lights and all that stuff and UV lights. And you'd see them in the morning, they would come out. And I had like this little magnetic rock platform under the basking light. And they would come out and sit on that basking rock in the morning. So you come down, turn on the lights. Well, they'd already be on because they're on a timer, and you'd see them, and they would like hear something when the door would close, and they would periscope and look. And as soon as they saw you get close, they would dart under the log that was on the other side of the enclosure. But you'd pick them up. They're super reluctant to bite. They're a rear-fanged venomous reptile. So, people are like, but they're super, super reluctant to bite, but very fast and very, very agile snakes. Like they would move through the enclosure like it was nobody's business. I had like plants and other branches and stuff in there. So, objects that you would think, oh man, like you see like a ball python like slither up to a log and it bumps its nose a couple times before it figures out it's got to go over it or under it. These things are like, nope, I'm jumping right over this thing. I'm going to wherever the hell I got to go. Super, super aware of their surroundings. So yeah, that is another really cool species of snake that really doesn't get enough attention for sure.
Well, and their care requirements are very different, aren't they?
What's interesting? So I set them up. I didn't set them up super differently. I gave them like Reptichip bedding. The thing is, like they're going to utilize every element of the enclosure. So Reptichip bedding that stayed a little on the drier side. A couple of logs to hide in, some branches because they will climb and maneuver through things, and rocks. If you give them some rock space, they'll utilize that. But temperature wise, it's like upper 80s, maybe low 90s at the basking spot. And you didn't really need crazy humidity on them. So they weren't actually the most challenging snake to maintain.
Mm. Where do they? So, do you know anything about their natural history?
Not a whole lot. I know they're found in Tanzania and some of the surrounding areas, and there's a couple of different subspecies, if I remember correctly. But I'm not hugely versed in their natural history. That was something that had I kept them longer, it would have been something that I inevitably dove into more because I would have wanted to try to breed them and get to understand more about their behavior cues and stuff.
Yeah. So did you have the trio all together or were they separate?
I had them all together. Yeah.
Oh
And
man. And they
they were
never
cool.
locked up or anything?
Nope.
Huh.
Nope. So, and I don't know if it was just a maturity thing, like an age thing, like, cause they're imports. So you don't know, all I know is that it was a trio, but had no other information on them whatsoever, outside of that. But they ate frozen, defrosted rodents with no issue.
Nice.
Which is always a plus when you're dealing with imported reptiles.
Yeah, for sure. So, and how often were you feeding them?
I just did once a week for them, and they were cool with that. I probably could have done twice a week. But I was still learning them as much as they were learning me and my routines. So I know like a lot of colubrids, especially like during breeding season, I'll feed twice a week, as you're trying to get females fattened for the season. But um, they had a very fast metabolism, so I'm sure they could have eaten twice a week and still been great.
Yeah. And with colubrids, do they go through a period of like fasting like you might do with pythons?
Yeah, so that's that brumation period where temps basically heat gets shut off, and I'm not looking at them at all for a few months, outside of just making
Wow.
sure they have access to clean water. But yeah, the luckily the basement gets on average stays about 60 degrees,
Wow.
even through the winter. So I basically just will slowly cool them down, make sure their systems are empty, there's no food that could potentially rot in their bellies, and then I just unplug the heat for about 2.5 3 months. And I'm just going in
Jeez.
there, checking on them, still doing health checks and everything like that, making sure everybody looks good and that they've got clean water and stuff. I'm just not going in messing with them or anything like that or offering food. And then, you slowly warm them back up, and then you start feeding them, get them kind of going. You're basically recreating winter into spring.
Hmm.
So once they're warm, they're hungry. So watch your hands when you go when you go into that
Yeah, yeah.
enclosure, because they're looking for food big time. But yeah, it's a nice little reprieve from the chaos, because they are a fast metabolism family of snakes. So they want to eat, and when you haven't eaten in 3 months, you want to eat a lot. And it's also that biological clock of like, oh, it's warm, it's breeding season, I gotta eat because soon I'm gonna come across a mate, and I've got like you set that biological clock into motion, so you've got to be on it. Um, it's one of the challenges of having such a diverse collection. Like the pythons and stuff are easy. I don't really do temp drops on ball pythons or really any of the python species, except when I kept like Brettles pythons and things. Um,
Sure.
but they're pretty much easy year round. Like my cycle for them is based in food versus temperature. So during the off season, I'm just feeding them less. I might feed them every 3 weeks instead of every week or every other week. And it might be a smaller prey item. Because if you think about the dry season in a place like West Africa, there's rodents that are still there, but food is more scarce because there's not rain that's providing plants that's providing food for them. So it's going to be smaller prey, for 6 to 8 months out of the year. And then going into breeding season, we're feeding once a week and slightly larger prey. And we're pushing that. And you'd be surprised what food cycling will trigger a reptile's body to do, especially something that doesn't have a cool season. Not to say anything against people that manipulate temperatures, because obviously that's something that works as well. And I have done it in the past. But for me, I've learned that food cycling is equally, if not more effective in pushing animals to go into that cycle, because where it doesn't get cold or temperatures don't change as much, what is changing? Access to
Yeah.
food and the frequency of it. Which is also the same for the colubrids. You're going from no food to holy shit, now there's food all the time. We've just added the hibernation element of it. We've cycled the body in a different way.
Do you think that that's important for longevity?
Um, I don't think it is. I think there are certain and I think that that's debatable for sure. I think it depends on the species. Um, take something like a corn snake, right? Where your range is as far north as New Jersey, and then down into Florida, all the way down
Yeah.
into the Everglades, where it get cold in Florida, sure, but it's not getting snow cold in the Everglades. Um, and those animals do just fine. They still cycle, they still do everything that they have to do. Um, and live perfectly fine. When I kept corn snakes as pets, without the intention to breed, I never brumated them, and they did just fine, and never witnessed any adverse effects. Um, I think what you do notice is growth rate differences. Of course, if you are somebody that starts to, well, I mean, you can think about it like this: if I find a hatchling black rat snake out in the wild, if it's not a fresh hatchling, and it's clearly got some size to it, it might be the size of like a 3-month-old captive corn snake, because I'm feeding that thing every week,
Yeah.
versus this little neonate that just went through winter, and hibernated for the first 3 months of its life, after maybe 5 meals,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then is like off to the races after it starts to warm up again. So I think you'll see that, but I don't think there's necessarily any adverse effects to not brumating them, especially when you're talking about species that have such a wide range naturally, and is not a guarantee for them to go through such an in-depth hibernation cycle.
Mm. What's something that you worked with at Nerd that you really enjoyed, but you don't think you'll ever have?
Monitors.
Yeah.
I absolutely loved working with the monitors at Nerd. Like scaly dogs. Come on now.
Yeah.
Like you can't beat that, man. Like you open up a giant walk-in enclosure and a 6-foot dinosaur is coming over with a derpy look on its face, like, "Hey, what's going on, buddy?" And like that is the coolest freaking thing ever to me. But I don't think that I will ever own one. Just the caging size requirements, like that is a large footprint for a single animal, and that's a lot of food and attention to detail. I think with everything else that I keep and am working with, I wouldn't be able to dedicate the amount of time that I would like to for something like that. But man, yeah, do I freaking miss it, dude. Any chance that I can to mess with a really friendly big water monitor or something like that, like I'm all about it, because I really do miss it.
I know. I just, well, as you can see, I've got the shirt on. Every day is Verana Day. I love monitors too. I had Nick Lillis on, and
I love
we were
Nick,
talking
yeah.
about, he's so passionate about them. And I love that he's like, yeah, if you want a water monitor, they need like a 12 by 12 foot enclosure. Like,
Yep.
you're not getting around that, So yeah, it's a huge commitment. And he even kind of talked about bringing like an adult or bringing adults to shows. So that way people can see like, look, this is how big it's going to get. It's not going to be this tiny little scrappy lizard.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. I think when you see a cute little baby black dragon or something that's like 9 inches long, you're like, oh man, this is going to be awesome. And then you suddenly see that 6.5-foot male and you're just like, oh.
Yeah. Well, and just how big they get in the span of a year too is crazy.
It's true.
It is crazy.
Yeah.
So did you have anything to do with socializing the animals at Nerd?
Yeah, so everybody, like the managers, of course, Kevin, and then the couple of staff that we had involved with like breeding and maintaining monitors, we all played some part in keeping them socialized and working with them. And as things were hatching, usually Kevin and I, unless we weren't around for whatever reason, we're pretty much right there with babies. Same with Rob, right there with babies as they're hatching, and we're immediately messing with them. So literally right from the egg, they're getting attention.
Wow.
And that's also the coolest freaking thing, man. Like watching a dinosaur hatch out of an egg and then like it's looking at you. And dude, we had like 5th and 6th generation albinos that coming right out of the egg, coming right to you and just climbing right into your hand.
Wow.
It's like, dude, like
Man.
that is the coolest freaking thing ever.
That is wild.
Yeah.
And I mean, so, and you touched on quarantine before, right? And how like at that scale at Nerd, which I can't even fathom how many animals were there, right? You said like, what, like 400 or 500 ball pythons alone, right? So
yeah.
And then you're talking all these other snakes. I mean, that's just ball pythons. And really high value pythons in there, like bolens and things like that. So what did quarantine look like when you guys were getting new animals in? And then what, well, we'll start with that. What did quarantine look like?
So initially, when new animals come in, they're getting soaked. So we immediately put them in a bin with some water so that they can rehydrate. Especially if they're just coming from a shipment. Want to make sure that they're hydrated. You'd be amazed what water can do when it comes to reptiles. As far as like if they've got some kind of ailment or something, a lot of times it stems from dehydration. Um,
Mm,
so getting water into them is key. Then we'd also usually keep them on soak for an extended period of time, sometimes a day or two. And we'd increase that water volume a bit because now we're going to look for anything like mites or ticks or anything like that that's going to drown in that water before it even goes into a room or a rack or whatever. Because if it's got mites or something, we need to treat it. So that is the initial step. And the nice thing with Nerd is because there were so many animals in there and you've got rooms full of monitors with light bulbs and everything, the building is hot. So you
mm.
don't have to worry about anything getting cold in water. Like
Yeah,
it's going to
yeah.
be fine. The ambient temperature is well worth the reptile being in that bin. So um but that is step one, and then outside of that it's making sure whoever's working with them understands, hey, like this is a fresh import, or hey, this just came from somebody, and we want to make sure that it's healthy. There's no respiratory infections, there's no mites that may have gotten missed in that initial soak, because of course it can happen. So in between animals, in between enclosures, so the way Nerds set up is there's dual bay utility sinks at the far end of every room, and one side of those would be filled up with water, and it would be a diluted bleach solution. And so in between animals, you're dunking your hand in that bleach sink and you're washing your hands with that.
Mm.
Same thing with water bowls. Water bowls are getting soaked in there, and then you've got a whole other set of clean water bowls that's going out. Bins from racks into the bleach sink. You're washing it out with this diluted bleach solution. You want there to be as little chance as possible of some disease, drool, whatever potential carrier of any potential disease to be nuked before you're putting an animal in a new enclosure, in a new bin, giving it a new water bowl. You want to have all of your bases covered there, and that is the most important thing for sure. And if you're dealing with an animal that's going in a cage versus a bin, then you're taking some bleach water from that sink into a bucket and a scrubby, and you're going in and you're cleaning the hell out of that beforehand, and giving it time to, once you've washed it down and everything, dry it, give it that chance to air out and everything, and then do another spray to wipe everything down, excuse me, before an animal goes in there. So it really does become about understanding the system, the protocols for the system, and why. But yeah, that's pretty much the line of events. But that initial soak will tell you so much about that animal, after dealing with potential dehydration just from the stress of shipment and all that stuff. But you'll see mites or anything like that will fall off, very quickly in those situations, and that's a great triage situation when you're getting something new in, and it's something that I've carried over into my personal collection. If I'm getting something in, it's going to get put on a soak, and my basement isn't 88 degrees, but I have an incubator that runs at 88 degrees year round, and it's
Wow.
specifically for that purpose. Like I have a couple of friends that breed ball pythons that they don't like to sell to the public. But they'll breed them and they'll send stuff to me to sell, or I'll buy whatever they produce. And these are people that, like, I've been to their places. I know their standard of care. I'm not gonna put my name on something that I don't 100% trust.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but even when those animals come in, they go through the same protocols. It doesn't matter that they're my friend, doesn't matter that I've been to their place, because anything can happen. I may have been to their place, but I don't know what animals they may have gotten in, in the meantime. So I know that, yes, it's being taken care of to the best of their ability. But again, if they're getting something from somebody else, I know how they maintain that situation, but it's still a potential risk. So I'm going to do the same thing when those animals come in. So I've got that one incubator that runs year round at 88 degrees, and I'll put snakes on a half inch to 1 inch soak of warm water. They stay in that on that for a day, sometimes two, depending on the size of the animal. If it's a bigger animal, I'll let it sit for a little longer. Um, and then we will do a triage from that point. I have a rack system that is like my triage rack, where they go in. It's just paper in a water bowl, and I'm watching those animals for 2-3 weeks, sometimes more, before it gets moved to wherever it's got to move, whether it's going into a rack for inventory or if it's going to get moved into to breeding, raise up for breeding or whatever the case may be. And sometimes I'll move them into a totally different spot in the house. If I'm like, hey, this is an import, and maybe I saw some mites, like I'll put them, like I've got a tree boa next to me that right here in the bedroom that I needed away from every other snake because it came in and it had some mites on it, and I don't lose my mind over mites. They're annoying for sure. But sometimes they happen, and it is what it is. So I'm like, hey, you know what? I'm gonna take care of that snake, and it's been here now for a few weeks. Initial soaks were taken care of. It's been treated. I haven't seen anything on it for a while, but it's going to stay here for a few more weeks before it moves to its next place. And that's the same kind of stuff that would ideally be happening at Nerd. And if for whatever reason those protocols were broken, then it's about triaging that situation before it gets out of hand. We're figuring out why it got moved, before it was supposed to, or whatever happened, why it happened. Talking with that staff member, making sure that whatever is going on is isolated to that specific space. Because the other thing to take into consideration when you're dealing with a large staff, it's inevitable, because every person has their own set of variables that they're bringing to the table when it comes to maintenance. Even no matter how good your systems are, it is inevitable something's going to happen. So, and it could be totally on an accident. It could be like, hey, I thought this was the tub that was supposed to, the animal in this tub was the one that was supposed to get moved, and it might have been, no, it was the tub below. So stuff happens. It's important to not freak out, and just isolate the situation, triage the situation, and then move accordingly and figure out how to make the best of whatever the situation is. But as long as you're adhering to whatever those protocols are, largely, then if you have a breach in that protocol for whatever reason, it should be a much easier ordeal to navigate and deal with than if things are just running rampant and you can't find patient X, for whatever reason, because it just got thrown into a rack somewhere, and then it's all chaos, and you don't know what patient X may have had that's now potentially going to infect something else. And then, 6 months down the line, something drops dead because it got some random disease from that previous experience with mites or what, and you just don't know. If you let things go haywire, they will go haywire.
Yeah.
So systems and protocols, especially with a collection as large as Nerds, it is necessary, 100% necessary. And then, like I said, on the chance that something gets breached in that protocol method, then how you handle it, how you isolate it, is the next step in making sure it doesn't become a larger situation. And also, like, reiterating with staff why we do what we do, and making sure that you're paying as much attention as possible, because again, mistakes will happen. It's just part of the human condition. So how do we navigate that when it happens, and how do we circle back with whatever the staff member did, or whoever the staff member was, and make sure, like, hey, was this just a simple mistake? Cool. Make sure we're paying attention for next time so this doesn't happen again. Or is this a, like, dude, like, this was a major mess up, like, where we've got to talk about something. And each situation is different, so you react accordingly. And Again, if your systems are in place and you're working them as they should be, it's typically not a giant situation, but having those systems in place is absolutely your best friend, from the jump.
With that, you said it was an Amazon that has or had mites and
Yep.
has been treated and everything. So
Yep.
what does mite treatment look like in your collection?
So this Amazon was a not a large Amazon, but a bigger Amazon. So I had it on soak for a 48-hour period and noticed that there were some mites floating in the water, and I was like, okay, cool. So we're gonna deal with this. So what happens next is I'll take that animal out. I'll put it in a bin with some paper, let it dry out from just being on the soak for a little while, and I'll put it in an isolated area so it's not around any other reptiles that it could potentially send mites off to. And then I'll give it pretty much about 48 hours to sit by itself. Obviously, it'll have a water bowl. But nothing else. I don't want there to be a mite that goes somewhere and lays an egg, or lays some eggs somewhere, and then I've got to deal with this nightmare again. So what will happen is I'll actually put it back on a soak. I'll give it maybe 15 to 30 minutes just soaking in the water to drink, if it's going to drink. And then what I'll do is I'll add a couple of drops of Dawn dish soap, and that breaks the surface tension of the water. So if there's a mite that's on the back of the snake and the water line maybe doesn't quite touch the back of the snake, when that mite starts moving, it's going to get caught in that water. And instead of just floating on the surface tension, it will just go and drown in that. And depending on the severity of the situation, I'll let it soak for another day or two. Usually on average for the Amazons, when I have experienced this in the past, usually 24 hours is a good amount of time. Their scales are very tight. Especially if they're well hydrated. So usually 24 hours, like a mite is going to move if it's suddenly like, oh, there's no more oxygen over here. I got to figure this out. The trick with them is like under the jaw, that bottom jaw skin is very, very loose and flexible. So checking in those areas, also checking in the heat pits, the nostrils, the eye sockets, and the ventral scales. Mites, and that goes for really any snake. Like those are a lot of the key spots that you want to look at, but I've learned with the Amazons that's a really big deal. Amazons have big eyes. Those ocular cavities are massive. Mites will go in there, and you're not going to see one or two. You're just not. It's as simple as that. So you will have a problem if you're not paying attention to that. So one way that you can mitigate that is if you take the snake and you take a Q-tip with some mineral oil that's harmless to the snake, but you dab the eye, the ocular scale, with some mineral oil, it will inevitably go into the ocular cavity. And because it's a much more viscous fluid than water, it's going to trap that mite, and that mite is going to freak out and is going to try to move to the surface. And then you can take that same Q-tip and wipe that away. So usually within a couple minutes, you'll see that happening. So that's worked for me numerous times in the past. And then what I'll do then, after I've taken some time with the ocular scale, I'll rinse, just spray with some water really gently over the eye to just kind of clear that off. And I'll put the animal back on a soak for another day. And then I'll pull it out. I'll put it into a bin, and I'll usually do a light spray of prevenamite. Because again, it's just going to be paper and a water bowl. And then I'll let the snake just kind of sit there, and then I'll be monitoring it every day, multiple times a day. I'll come back and look and see if there's any leftover mites. Usually with the prevenamite, they're just kind of dropping dead. And then you're pretty much good to go as long as you're disrupting that life cycle of the mite. So maybe after 2 weeks of being in that final setup, I might put it on one more soak, just in case there were any eggs laid somewhere that may have survived the process. And in that time, while the animal's soaking, I'm also taking a bleach solution and cleaning out that tub and making sure I'm scrubbing every bit of it. Even the holes that I've punched out for air, I'm taking a Q-tip and just going through there, messing with that. Leave no hole unturned.
Yeah.
But typically, so I'll do that, and then another 2 to 3 weeks, I'll have that animal back in that very basic bin. So it's a couple month process if I see mites somewhere,
Man.
because the risk, again, like I said, mites, it's not the end of the world. When you get in a new animal and when you deal with imports, it's something you just kind of inevitably have in the back of your mind, right? But it's how you go about treating them and making sure you're on the management of it to nuke it, to get it done. um that matters. So if that means I've got to deal with a snake in a quarantine setup for 2.5 months, cool, man. By the time that snake leaves that setup, there's no mites.
Yeah.
I can damn near guarantee that. And that's the biggest thing, because once anybody who's experienced mites with, and one snake is very annoying. 10 snakes, 20 snakes is a nightmare.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no sanity left when you've got to deal with it with that many animals. It's a much harder process at that point. So I'd rather take the time. I also typically don't get in large numbers of snakes all at the same time. So I can manage and mitigate each situation as it comes through with a lot of detail and pay attention to a lot of things, because I'm not bringing in an order of 70 Amazons, or
Oh my
100 ball
God.
pythons, like we're not doing that. If I'm doing
Yeah.
that, it's one or two animals, or it's at max, it's going to be 10 animals, and that's usually like a ball python shipment from one of my friends, where I'm just like, okay, we're going to put these guys on soak in that incubator for a couple days. And I'm not concerned. I'm just going through this because it's my protocol. It's how I maneuver, and if something pops up, cool, then we deal with it. But 99% of the time, I don't really have any issues. And that 1%, when something happens, we just go through the chain of protocol, and a couple months later, we're in the clear.
Nice. And it keeps the rest of your collection clean and clear.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And since you deal so much with the Amazons, do you deal with a lot of imports? And then like how much of the time is it an import that you're getting from somebody that's already established, or is it a import, like import where it's like a fresh import?
Yeah, so most of the times, so when I started building the collection, I got in a lot of imports, because it's easier. Like that's the reality of Amazon tree boas is there are people that breed them, but a lot of times they don't even make it to the market. So
Mm,
you've thrown your name on a waiting list, but you're like, damn, I want a snake, and for me, trying to build up a breeding group, it was inevitable. I want to make sure I've got new blood as well as established blood. So I spent a lot of time dealing with imports, and I again, thankfully, with the connections through Nerd and stuff, like I inevitably was talking to importers and stuff on either on behalf of Kevin, because I was his next in line person, or just importers who would hit me up, out of the blue, and just be like, "Hey, I saw that you were interested in this. We just got some. If you're interested." Um, so very rarely was I dealing with imports that were long-term captives from somebody else or captives by somebody else. Most of the imports that I've had to deal with were fresh imports that had only been in the country for maybe a week tops.
oh wow.
And I actually liked that more, because and this is certainly not to shit on any importer or anything like that, but uh, when you are dealing with an imported animal, you have a window of time to get it established without absolutely stressing it out to the point of no return.
Mm,
Right. So if I'm going to go to an importer who's going to get an animal, right out of the crate, they're going to set it up their way. And, there's a lot of great importers that do things, in a very clean and clear fashion. And they're very much by the book, and they do a great job. But how they maintain things is largely, in many instances, for temporary purposes, because the object is to then sell it. So maybe it's not the best. Maybe its parameters aren't ideal. They're livable. Like something like an Amazon tree boa that has a really wide natural range can tolerate drier conditions, can tolerate moister conditions, can tolerate cooler temps or warmer temps. Um, So it might be okay, but then when I get it, if I'm putting it in my setup, how I have had things running, that might be totally opposite to what it just experienced. And now I'm shocking its system.
Mm.
And if there's some underlying issue or whatever, then that creates chaos. So I'd rather deal with an import that's been in the country for a short period of time that I can get put through my uh, quarantine protocols and then get it into its setup as fast as I can, with as little nonsense and chaos as possible, unless again, if we've got some mite situation or a medical situation that needs to be, paid attention to. Um, and you'd be surprised at how easy it can be to establish an import. Now, I'm specifically talking about Amazon tree boas here. Every imported species has their own set of quirks and differences and needs. So I want to make that really, really clear. Like, I'm specifically talking about my experience with imported Amazons. Once they're set up in their own enclosure, I give them time to just do their own thing, explore, figure it out. Usually within a week, I've got them taking defrosted rodents with no issues.
Wow.
After being in their setup. I think out of the 50 or 60 imported Amazons that I've worked with in the last, I don't know, 5 years or so, I've only lost like 2.
Jeez.
In comparison to something like even like the emerald tree boas, the cousin to the Amazon, that like they stress out significantly easily and take a lot more effort to get them to bounce back. I mean, we hear the horror stories,
Yeah.
I don't really have those issues with Amazons, and I'm very thankful, and it also means that when you're dealing with captive bred animals, they're that much more rock solid, which is wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. So so obviously mites and ticks and everything has got to be a big concern when you're getting in imported animals, that you want to kind of take care of that first and foremost. But what about internally? Are you do they go on like a wormer, or do you get fecal samples like sent out or tested? How
So
does that work?
I'm paying attention to the first few poops that happen when the animals are here, and luckily I don't have too many issues with internal parasites with the Amazons here. If something comes in and has a weird poo, then I'm going to get it checked out. I'm going to either look at it myself, because I've been lucky enough to work with many vets in the past who've shown me what to look for, whether it be protozoan or worms or anything like that. And I can kind of tell, what I should expect based on what the poo is going to look like. But if I'm seeing healthy stool, then I'm not in a rush to start putting medication into the animal. And I might still do my own, fecal overview and just pay attention, see if I'm noticing anything that's out of the norm. But largely, I can say that when it comes to the Amazons, I don't think I've had really any internal parasite issues,
Wow.
with the exception of maybe one or two animals. And those were simple, like, hey, we're just going to do a dewormer, and we're going to be, the trick also becomes like, the tree boas are fragile, even though Amazons can tolerate a lot. When you start blasting them with some of these medications, it can cause some internal trauma. So I try to do my best to navigate with as little use of that as possible, because I don't want to disrupt too much of the internal biome of the animal, because then if you knock something out of whack that causes that animal to stress out more, you might bring some other issue to the forefront. I think it's always important to remember, whether we're dealing with an imported animal or a captive animal, these are not sterile coffee mugs. They're a
Yeah.
living, breathing creature that has an internal gut fauna and flora that is thriving, and when that gets thrown out of whack, they can get sick. Same thing for us as humans. We have an internal biome of gut flora and fauna, and when we get sick, that gets out of whack. And depending on what we're sick with, can take a lot of medication to fix. And the more stressed we are during that time, the harder it can be to bounce back from whatever we're sick from. Hell, even just have a common cold. but be in the middle of something super stressful when you've got it. You're going to be sick of probably a bit longer than if you're
Oh
just
yeah.
like, oh man, at least I can be home for a couple days, nothing's going on, and then usually 48 hours later, for the most part, you just have a little sniffle and you're good to go. you know
Yeah, yeah.
um Reptiles can be a very different situation, and also we're dealing with a creature that by nature is trying to mask any illness because it's survival of the fittest. I'm not going to show you I'm sick until I'm damn near about to die. If
Yeah.
you're not paying attention to those little minute changes or differences, like I know how my Amazons are supposed to act, especially in the setups I have. They're all in the same style of setup. So I can kind of, once I get past the quirks of each individual animal, I kind of know what I can expect when I go from cage to cage or tub to tub. And if I see something that's different, I need to figure out why. Is it a female that, normally would be sitting in her arboreal hide, 90% of the time? Now she's chilling over by the water bowl in the front of the enclosure. Maybe she's cycling. Maybe she's starting to produce follicles. Let me pull her out. Let me make sure there's no other weird health ailments that I can see. And then while I'm putting her back in her enclosure after an inspection, I'm going to palpate her. And typically that's a sign for me that female is starting to produce follicles. So, because it's another species, I don't temperature cycle. I will food
Mm.
cycle. So I have girls that will start cycling in August. And I've got other girls that are giving me litters in August. So they're kind of all over the map. I don't force them to do anything that their bodies aren't willing to do already. I have a time of year that I would normally be food cycling. If they don't go, then maybe they go 5 months later. Okay, cool. If that's when you're ready to go, that's when you're ready to go. Who am I to tell you, anything different? You're the creature that's got to do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I try. My whole concept with them is put as less stress on the animal as possible, and be thankful that out of all the Corrales, the Amazons seem to be the most hardy imports with the least amount of issues in comparison to some of the others.
Hell yeah. Yeah, it's anytime I hear import, it terrifies me, but man, you make it sound easy.
It's one of those things, man, where it's like working at Nerd certainly helped, kind of ease that, like, oh, import is, it's got a million issues and it's got to be this, got to be that. Nerd helped subside some of that for me, but I dealt with imports well before working at Nerd, and had my fair share of things that failed to thrive, because inevitably it is an import. Um, I've had my fair share of imports that do fine for 2-3 years and then all of a sudden drop, and something stressed them out, and internally that biome got out of whack, and it took them out, and but I didn't change anything for 2 or 3 years. Some stress factor or some element somewhere caused something to freak out. It's I think the way I approach import now is, again, I think there's a lot of great folks. I'm forgetting the company name, but Josh Adler, I think the Reptile Kingdom. I'm totally losing it. I apologize, Josh.
Names are hard.
Yeah. Imports a bunch of stuff, and I think he does a phenomenal job of establishing the animals he gets in across a gambit of so many different species. And every time I've seen him at a Tinley Expo or anything like that, like, the animals look mint. Like, they look like they've been like the attention and the time has been put into every single one of those animals that has come through his doors. And when people are looking for imports, that's somebody that I recommend, because I'm like, hey, he's put in that time and he's pushing them, to make sure that they are as healthy as they can be by the time he's offering them for sale. And I think people also need to understand that imports, there are certain species, like, do we need to be importing ball pythons? I
Yeah.
think large scale, there is benefit. importing those animals gives value to those animals in a situation where otherwise they would be tossed aside or just mutilated for the skin trade. So providing some other kind of value to that animal that says like, hey, no, keep them alive. It's worth something. There's a benefit to keeping them alive. I think, okay, great. And the market, I don't think we need, whatever.
Yeah. We got 40,000, bro.
Yeah,
we're good.
we're good. We're good. But for some of these other species that are nowhere close, not even a hair close to that level of established, we have to get these imports in to figure out how to establish them and kind of get that ball rolling, and then we can look at either reducing the need to import or still import just maybe on a smaller quota, a smaller annual quota, so that the species can rebound and do what it needs to do. And I think for a lot of species, like we've seen that. I think we've seen quotas drop for many species. But if you know what to expect, if you talk to the people that are importing, you'll find the ones that are willing to take that time and explain everything. And that's when you've got somebody that you're really dialed into, who's going to help you if something pops up, dealing with nematodes and subcutaneous parasites and all that stuff. Like that happens and it sucks when you got to deal with it. It's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
It's not. It's another level of keeping reptiles that it takes the experience up a notch. Like that's another notch in the belt to be like, oh yeah, like I've dealt with imported yellowtail crebos that have had subcutaneous parasites, and it's you can remove them sort of like expressing a pimple. In some instances. Other instances, you need to have them brought to a vet and they need to have, just a very simple surgical procedure done. That would be the same as like removing a subcutaneous lipoma, from a human, like it's not the end of the world. It's another challenge, and I think importing and the concept of imported animals and wild caught animals gets thrown with this stigma of bad or it's going to be another layer of headaches. Like I still teeter totter back and forth with like the morph market tag for wild caught animals. I think it's good. People should know, if what they're getting is wild caught or not, because again, it poses various challenges along the way. But how we frame things and how people see things, when you just see this red wild caught, like it's almost like that's bad. Why is that even, why is that here?
Poor animal.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I think there's a different way to kind of go about that, because it is a more nuanced conversation than just like, wild caught means problems and bad and don't deal with that. It's going to be a terrible experience. And it's not the case at all. But,
do you have like a microscope that you look at your snake's poops, or are you just looking at them, just eyeballing it? You're just looking and like, I don't see anything moving.
So I need to get a new microscope. But yeah, I did have a microscope here. I forgot what the brand was. But a pretty decent microscope that I was able to see various microscopic worms and protozoa and stuff in fecal samples. And I was really lucky early on. There was the local reptile vet in my hometown. His name was Dr. Krauser. Whenever I would bring in reptiles that had any issues, he would bring me to the back to check stuff out when they would do the swabs, the oral swabs, or we do fecal samples. Come look at this under a microscope. This is what we're seeing. So between him and other folks, and even Kevin, showing like, no, like this is what this is. This is what we're paying attention to, and this is how we treat it. And there are still times, like if I come across something that I haven't seen before, like Kevin's actually one of the first people that I'll call when it comes to medical thing, like, because I've literally been in situations where I've watched him like explain to vets what something is and how it should be treated, and have the dosage math correct, on how to freaking treat it. And the vet's like, no, actually that makes sense. That's actually exactly how it should be done. So, if I need a second opinion, I'll go get a second opinion. But, coming from somebody who's seen more imported animals first of their kind ever to come into the country than anybody else, he's experienced a lot of what those issues are going to be and how to handle them. So he's totally one of the first people that I'll call to at least get a direction what I can be expecting. And if he doesn't have an answer, he knows somebody who does or has some reference point to check out. And I value that tremendously.
Yeah, I have at my work, we have a microscope in the lab. I wonder if I could, well, I'll think about that later.
Hey guys, I brought some poop. If it smells back here.
Yeah, it's, I mean, we can see tardigrades, so I'm assuming we'd be able to see, something crawling around in there. That'd be interesting to take a look at some samples,
Absolutely.
So, all right, man. Well, we'll wrap this up, dude. I really appreciate you coming on and spending the time with me. Where can people find you? Where can people see your animals that are available? All that good stuff.
Heck yeah. So Brassman Reptiles on pretty much all my social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, whatever else, Twitter,
the Tic Tac,
X, whatever, Tic Tac, yeah, all that. And then if you want to see my full availability, check out my website, brassmanreptiles.com. I post a few things on Morph Market, just for the sheer sense of being relevant, because that's where everybody looks at things. But all of my inventory gets posted on my website. Yeah, so you can check it out all on there. And then, of course, the Reptile Talk podcast. Check us out on YouTube and on Instagram and Facebook at the Reptile Talk podcast. And yeah, there you go.
And it's on Spotify too, and all that good stuff. I know, because that's where I'm signed up on there. I get the notification every time a new episode drops. So.
Heck yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys. You're both fantastic people, and thanks for bringing it back. And
absolutely, man.
Bringing Rob along for the ride.
Yeah, heck yeah, man. It definitely makes it very fun, for sure.
Hell yeah.